summer. I hope that you'll all have an opportunity to take some well-deserved vacation here in the weeks ahead. Certainly, as we get into the heart of the summer here in July and August. But we do appreciate everybody taking the opportunity to join us this afternoon. Just a couple of things before I introduce our first speaker. I would ask that you all mute your lines so that there's no interference in terms of audio with our two guest speakers. I'd also like to remind you that if you have any questions, please do so in the chat function. And I see that Jim's already announced his welcome. So welcome, Jim, and all others out there. And please use the chat function. And Janet Green will manage all the questions during the Q&A. This session is being recorded. We're going to make this session available on the RAC website following this presentation today. So for those who unfortunately cannot join us, there will be an opportunity for people to listen in on the two presentations afterwards. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. And our first speaker is Demetre Eliopoulos. Demetre is the Senior Vice President, Managing Director of Public Affairs at Angus Reid. Demetre has worked in the market research field for more than 20 years, and he's advised a number of executives on a wide array of sectors, both in the public and the private, who represent some of the biggest organizations in North America. He is the author of the weekly COVID-19 Monitor, which really is what this session is all about, trying to understand how COVID-19 has affected Canadians, has affected the workforce, and has affected in particular the railway sector. So I'm going to now turn it over to Demetre. Demetre, welcome, and over to you now to walk us through your presentation.
Great, thanks, Mark, and thanks all for having me here today and for tuning in. I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen. Okay, are you able to see that okay? I'm going to take the silence as yes. Okay, yes. Thanks. Thank you very much. So again, thanks again for having me here today. Just a quick background on what we're about to talk about. So go back to March 12th, which is really the day that everything really hit Canada quickly, and really just caught us all by storm. A lot of organizations were doing their part to do what they could to help, and we thought that the best way that we could do to help, we understood that things were going to move very quickly, would be to collect data, do what we do best, and try and disseminate it among various organizations to help them with their decision-making process and really to understand the environment that we're now living in. So just scroll down. Essentially, all we do as researchers is we measure two things. We measure behavior, past, present, and stated future behavior and perceptions. And we've been tracking this on a weekly basis since this is week 15 now, which means that we've been doing this. We've been in this pandemic in Canada anyways for 15 weeks. And I'll show you the tracking graphs, but from my experience, and I've been doing this for quite a while, and I look at lines for quite a while, I've never seen a shift like this before, both from a behavioral point of view and also from a perception point of view. So, all this to say, what's overlying all of this is that this is changing very quickly, and the data that I share today could very well be likely will be outdated from a month from now. So just to get into what we'll be talking about, four major themes. I have about 30 minutes to talk. We'll talk about the current landscape and really the focus on the health of the pandemic itself and people's personal finances. That seems to be the two overarching themes of what we're going through. An economy that's stagnated and everybody dealing with the fear of coronavirus and many who have had first-person experiences. And then also understanding, what's the emotion, what are people actually doing right now, What's the day-to-day life like? From there, we're going to talk a little bit about travel. So where are people comfortable going to? Are Canadians taking vacations? And then specifically about modes of transportation. What are modes of transportation that they're comfortable or uncomfortable with? And specifically, as it relates to railway, what are some of the specific safety features that they're looking for in order to return to the rail system? Then we'll talk a little bit about perceptions of reviving the economy, the urgency for it, and whether or not it's okay for companies to engage with Canadians, and whether it won't seem tone deaf in this current environment. And then finally, what's next? What do Canadians think is next? And what's going to, what is the outlook after this is all over? How will things change permanently? So let's just jump right into it very quickly. About the methodology. As I said, we've been doing this for 15 weeks, an online survey, which is how we do all of our research using the Angus Reid Forum, a representative sample of 1,000 to 1,500 Canadians each week. We have, you'll see the tracking data, and we're always updating questions and new lines of inquiry as this thing changes. So first off, let's talk about the current landscape and the overall feelings of stress. And so on the right-hand side, we just ask about how stressed are you right now with this outbreak. And interestingly, we've even had to change the scale on this. Usually a scale goes from very to not at all. We've actually had to increase the scale to an extreme level given the state of the pandemic. So you see that 20% saying that they are currently very or extremely stressed, which is 1 in 5 Canadians, still quite a lot. But what's happened, and you can see over time the red line being extremely stressed, and that was quite a bit higher before, and the blue line being either not very or not at all. 40%, 39% saying not very, not at all, and that's interesting in that you can see that the not stress took over the stress people at the height of the pandemic, which is interesting in that, this is when we were seeing the most cases, a surge in deaths across Canada, and you would assume that the urgency or the emotional weight of that would carry forward, but it goes to show that the adaptability of Canadians, and that, the peak really came in week number 2. People weren't really sure what was going on. And then as we understood their new surroundings, they really, we're able to come to grips with what's going on and not overreact to it. When it comes to who are you concerned about getting sick, not surprisingly, it's people with older parents and people with children under the years of 10. And you can see the lowest level of concern is yourself personally. So 20% saying that they are extremely or very concerned about getting sick, and that's been pretty steady throughout this trend. So we ask Canadians, are things getting better or getting worse? And we ask that both in Canada, and we ask around the world. And you can see the blue line. This is quite a dramatic shift from early May to now, that we see, it started off around 10% saying things were getting better as opposed to worse. And now we're at a place where 86% of Canadians say that things in Canada are getting better. But you can see that the trend when looking at what's going on worldwide is the opposite. So if you see the gray bars in the background, those are the number of new cases globally. So that continues to rise. And I think Canadians are taking notice of events around the world. And there's pessimism about what's going around the world, but optimism of what's going on in Canada. So it'll be interesting to see how a wave 2 will affect the Canadian psyche, whether that's going to be seen as a major setback or not. So really hand in hand with all this is the economics of the situation. So lots of people we know have lost their jobs. We know that the government's going heavily into debt. Lots of Canadians are going into debt, loss of income. And so we ask people, what is it, if you had to choose in this situation, what are you most concerned about? And you can see that they're actually fairly tied in that, 54% are still thinking about the health crisis and 46% saying the economy. But you can see that that's been running pretty close the entire time. So the economy is on the minds of a lot of Canadians. So with the financial concern, we ask about concern about the Canadian economy, and we also ask about concern about personal finances. And you can see that in the tracking graph, the red line being the personal finances and the blue line being the economy, people have come to understand that obviously there was an initial onset of fear when it comes to personal finances. What's going to happen? Everything's shutting down. Am I going to lose my job? Those questions have largely been answered. And while 25% saying that they are extremely or very concerned is it's still a very high number. 1 out of every 4 Canadians saying a high level of concern. But interestingly, when it comes to the Canadian government and the Canadian economy, there's been a much higher level of concern, and that level of concern has largely been maintained. It's a little bit lower now, but largely you can see it's a fairly straight line from when it began. So more specifically, when it comes to personal finances, on the right-hand side, you can see that 20% have acquired some new debt as a result of COVID. So this is debt that they would have accumulated, they would not have accumulated had the pandemic not arrived, which is obviously quite a bit. A lot of that is coming in the form of credit card debt. And you can see that also in the main graph here, 32% saying that their personal finances have worsened in this time. 16% are actually saying that their finances have improved, and that's likely due to the lowering of personal expenses and having some sort of stability in their job and other sources of revenue. So now, what are Canadians doing? This is how we know how they've been feeling and how they've been affected from a financial point of view. First, we ask, what are the perceptions of social distancing? Are they doing a good job? And about half of Canadians saying that I've done all that I can to socially distance myself. And 41% saying that I've been very diligent, but I'm sure there's more that I can do. So that's the vast majority of the population saying that, at least self-reporting, that they've been doing a good job. So, do they have spare time? And I think, as we'll see in a moment, a lot of layoffs have occurred, and a lot more people working from home. So 55% are saying that they have more time on their hands, with 12% saying that they have less time on their hands. Now, 21% of parents are saying that they have less time on their hands, and that's likely because they're balancing childcare and schooling at home with their own work duties from home. So in the workplace, the number that I'll draw your attention to is on the right, is the proportion of Canadians that report that they've been, of working Canadians who have been laid off or their company has shut down. So it's at 28%. And this is not even accounting for shortening of work shifts or having less time available. So that's a lot of Canadians who have been affected from an employment point of view. Changes in the workplace, 44% of Canadians who can are working from home. They're canceling meetings with clients. They're canceling and minimizing internal meetings. Obviously, work trips have been postponed for those that it's relevant to. 16% saying a shortening of work shifts, and only 13% saying that they haven't been impacted at their place of work. So what is it that they're actually doing at home? Interestingly, there's some therapy shopping going on. So we asked the question about whether people are shopping for things that they wouldn't have if it hadn't been for the pandemic, and there's a pretty large number that are saying that they've done that. Obviously, as is the case here, a lot more Zoom calls are happening, both on a social level and in a business level, and that's become a new norm. A lot more consumption of online, social media consumption, Netflix, what have you, those are all on the increase. People are still stocking up on their groceries, less from an emergency point of view, but more so I don't have to go to the grocery store as often. And people have more time, so they're cooking and they're trying new recipes. Now, all this to say that there was a major surge in all of this in the early time of the pandemic, which we're calling things early, even though it's only been a few months. But in April, all of these things had a massive surge. And now we're starting to see that all of these things are starting to decline. The social media consumption, the Netflix, the grocery stocking up, the shopping, and there's been a lot of Zoom fatigue as well. So these are all starting to decline, and it's a show that people are really, we're seeing this as a temporary lifestyle, and they're getting ready for things to go back to normal. So when we talk about things going back to normal, one, we looked at the perception that the health risk of the coronavirus has been overblown. And you can see that this has been, this is the blue line at the bottom, this has been growing. Again, it's a pretty significant growth over the course of 2 months, but more and more people are saying that it's been overblown, and more people are saying, half of Canadians saying it's time for things to go back to normal. So people are really itching to get back into their routines, and you know, this is not really something that they're looking for in the long term. So a little bit of a close-up on travel. Obviously, it's quite relevant to what most of you are doing. Where are Canadians willing to travel? And so we ask about, we start small and then we go bigger. So in your neighborhood, to another part of town, to a friend or family member's home, traveling to another city, or traveling to another country. And we give them 3 options. I'm fine with it. I would go, but I'd be cautious about it, or I'd avoid it. And if you look at the right-hand side, the net would go, that's a combination of I'm fine with it or I would go cautiously. 97% saying I would go out in my neighborhood. That's 2/3 of Canadians saying I'm fine with it. Traveling to another part of town, that's also fine. Going to a friend or family member's home, this is interesting. It's not as high as the other 2, but still 46% saying that they're fine with it, and 86% saying that I would go cautiously. And this is something that we've also seen over time. These are all things that have changed quite a bit in the course of a short period of time. Traveling to another city, this is sort of the first area where we see a little bit lower levels. So 71% saying that they would be comfortable with that. Only 1 in 3 saying they're totally fine with it. And of course, this is not a surprise. Traveling to another country, only 1/4 saying that. You don't have to. So we also asked about vacation plans. So first off, we asked about, you know, what were your plans before the pandemic, and what are your travel plans now? And if you look at the right-hand side, 79% saying that they had some sort of travel plan, whether it's a staycation or a flight before the pandemic, and that really hasn't changed. 83%, it's even gone up a little bit, showing the need for a little bit of additional relaxation time. Still saying that they have summer plans. But what's interesting is the shift in where they're planning on going. So the staycation has gone from 14% to 47%, and within my province has gone from 39% before the pandemic to 49% now. Still fairly high is to another province or territory in Canada. That's dropped significantly, a -16 from before to now, and you can see that. Driving to the US or visiting the US and flying to another country, those are just right off the table now. So if we look at the modes of transportation that people are comfortable with, again, we look at different modes of transportation. We ask, fine with it, I would go cautiously, or I avoid it. Not surprisingly, people are most comfortable by car, and that's not Uber or Lyft. That's really driving their own car. 75% saying I'm fine with it. 96% say that they're good with it in total. From there, there's a big chunk in the middle that are roughly the same proportion, and so that's traveling by train, taxi, Uber, flight within Canada, city bus, or subway. They're all roughly in the same range of 14-15% saying that they're fine with it, and roughly 40% who say I would go, yeah, I'm either fine with it or I'll be cautious about it. Interestingly, taking a bus to another city, and keep in mind that this isn't applicable to all Canadians equally. This was only asked to people who would use this form of transportation or have used this form of transportation. So it's only the people that it's applicable to. So yeah, taking a bus to another city, that seems much lower than the others. I think that's quite interesting. And then of course, taking a flight outside of Canada, that's off the table for 76% of Canadians. So we offered a list of potential safety measures specifically for train travel. And we wanted to know how important this was. So we give the 3 options again, whether you would not travel without this particular option, whether it's a thing that's not nice to have, but it wouldn't stop me from taking a trip, or people who say, I just don't need this. This is not applicable to me. So the number one necessity of a safety measure is having no one seated directly beside you. So that's 63% saying that, with 62% saying sanitizing wipes, having that made available. The next one down being railway employees wearing face coverings, and then after that, providing face coverings to passengers. From there, we're looking at temperature checks, and 42% saying that they would not travel without health-related questionnaires. Hand sanitizer instead of soap in the onboard laboratories. Railway employees wearing gloves, 32% saying that they wouldn't travel without that. Food and beverage service reduced to minimum interaction. And then the last one saying change business or prestige class to prepackaged, which is not surprising because not everyone is partakes in those particular things. So that gives you a sense of the priorities of what people are looking for when it comes to feeling safe on train travel. And it's interesting to note that they're looking for not just one thing, they're looking for a few things, and they're really looking for a signifier that whoever they're dealing with, whether it's transportation or businesses, they want an indication that these organizations have really thought it through and have really invested the effort, so that they feel comfortable and they don't have to feel the need to scrutinize the efforts and that it's been taken care of for them. So now we'll talk about reviving the economy. So here you can see, and again, I mentioned it before, and I really underscore it, the degree to which this is changed in a short period of time is really quite astounding. I mean, usually in most of the research I do, things don't change this rapidly. To see these proportions change in this case, it's a 30% change of heart among Canadians in a period of less than 2 months. So 72% saying it's about time the government starts reopening businesses, and 74% saying it's about time the government starts to reopening public places. And so this is part of just itching to get back to normal and itching for us to get rid of social isolation, and also to stimulate the economy, of course. So specifically when it comes to stimulating the economy and the ability of organizations to engage. So we saw 79% say that it's now is the time to start stimulating the economy. Again, that's gone quite high to 79%, and it's changed quite a bit. And then in the opposite direction is the ability for companies to engage. And so we ask a couple of agreement statements. This is the wrong time for companies to advertise to me to buy products and services. And I don't want to see companies launching any new products or services at this time. And you can see that that's changed from being in the 60s to now in the 30s. And then one caveat I would place around this is that I suspect, and we haven't really done a deep dive into this, that there's a good chunk of Canadians out there that say that they really just hate advertising, and they really think that never is the right time to advertise to me, regardless of a pandemic. So that probably accounts for at least a chunk of that 35%. In terms of the way companies can communicate with customers, it just needs to be sensitive to the crisis. And we've done some deeper dives on this as well. And it's not necessarily that everything has to be centered on pandemic information. And we saw in the early months, most organizations were talking specifically about the pandemic, what they're doing during the pandemic. It just needs to show that the communications that are being brought forth, they need to be aware of the environment. And there's some commercials or communications and commercials that have really failed because they're depicting an environment that people are not currently experiencing. And so we've done some other testing where some of the ads that are really falling flat that could have been seen as great ads in a previous time are, ones where there's a 20-something-year-old that it's going to the club and then jumping into a car and they're and doing all these things that are just not happening the way that it was before. So it just seems that as a tone-deaf environment. So I think the big takeaway is that in any communication, you just really have to be mindful of the environment and also to the potential underlying emotion that goes along with it. Only 5% are saying no communications about their products or services at this time, and 24% are saying just do what you have the same way as always. And these are, a lot of these people are the ones who are thinking it's time to stimulate the economy. We got to get back to business, and this is the way that companies need to do it. So finally, what's next? What's coming up? And so 74% say that there's going to be a second wave of the coronavirus and they're concerned about it. 21% say that they're not concerned about it, but there seems to be consensus that a second wave is going to take us on. Only 5% saying that there's not going to be a second wave. Can we keep doing what we're doing now? Can we keep this social distancing, which, as we said before, people are giving themselves pretty good scores on? 21% are saying, I'm having a hard time maintaining that now. 11% saying, I can do this for a few more weeks, and 12% saying about a month ago. So if you wrap up that number, you're looking at 44% of the population who are saying, I'm either having a hard time or a month is my limit. So you can see this real itch to we need to get back to normal. I can't stay cooped up like this. I can't watch Netflix all day. I need to get back onto with my life. A quarter are saying, 27% saying that they can do this indefinitely though. So we're asking this on a weekly basis as well. Again, where would you go to? Are you fine with it? Would go cautiously, avoid it. So grocery stores, retail, restaurants, malls, airports, movie theaters, live sporting events. Grocery stores, people have always been fine with it or going cautiously because it's been a necessity. And that, with the exception of a huge surge in the click and collect groceries, people have not really been avoiding it. And you can see compared to March 23rd, 24th, excuse me, which was a bit of a high point in avoidance, you can see there's a pretty major difference. Interestingly, again, the proportion who said originally that they would avoid a retail shopping experience, 62%, has now gone to 22%. 83% said in March that they would avoid restaurants, now only 39%. For malls, 85% say they would avoid the mall, now it's 43%. Airports, even people are open to going to airports from 91% to 63%. Movie theaters, and this is a particularly interesting one that is the bottom, also clumped with live sporting events, in that a third of the population is still would be okay with going into a room full of strangers and sitting beside them for a couple of hours and breathing the same air. I think it's an interesting indication of the itch to get back to normal that a third of the population are willing to do that. So what do you think you're going to do when things are quote unquote back to normal? I mean, that was not exactly defined, but it's envisioning a scenario where things do indeed get back to normal. Are you going to do more of this or less of this? So shopping local and versus going to national brands, that seems to be the one that people will do more of the most. And then shaking hands, 62% on the other side. If you look on the lower right-hand corner, it seems like as of now, people are feeling pretty done with shaking hands with people, saying that they're going to be doing less of this. And I think it's just, I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard it, but I think this is a pretty momentous moment in the history of humanity to move from a salutation that's been around for centuries, that this might be the moment where that ends and we might move on to something else. Other things that people suspect that they will be doing more of, working from home, business calls, you can see that 33 and 31%, it seems like that's there to stay. Socializing, people want to get back to 26% saying that they'll do video socializing. So really by force, everybody has been pushed onto video conferencing, and we've all become much more familiar with the technology than we would have ordinarily. But there is a need to get back to in-person intimate gatherings with friends. 23% saying that they're going to do more of this. Only 10% saying that they're going to do less of this. It seems like click and collect groceries are also here to stay. It's a bit of a mixed bag. 22% saying that they'll do more of this, and 25% saying that they'll do less. I think roughly 33% of the population have actually tried click and collect. Some not successful, but have at least tried it. So, it's interesting to see that as a result of this pandemic, we've been pushed onto these features that some organizations try for years to create strategies to get you to adopt them, and things like Zoom, which a solid proportion of the population never heard of before, is becoming a pretty common thing, and that's also the case with click and collect. In terms of what's really sticking out for what people will be doing less of, vacationing abroad is one. Going to bars, clubs, air travel. There's quite a few things that are roughly a third to a quarter of the population saying that they're going to be doing less of these things. So, we are looking at, a pretty large shift in a variety of different lifestyle patterns that we have. But again, one of the limitations of this sort of work is that, or this sort of research, is that this is all perception based. This is all, what do people think this is going to happen, they're going to be doing in the future. And, just a reminder that, this is an emotional state. This is, they're reacting to their current environment. And this data and perceptions are moving rather quickly. So, who knows where priorities will lie as things start to open up and as things start to approach normal, whether these priorities will be and whether these predictions will hold true or not. But it's a good reflection of where people's heads are at now. What are they doing? What do they want to be doing? And what do they miss? I think that's that's what makes this data particularly interesting. So that's it for me in terms of summarizing the current environment. The overall takeaway is Canadians are managing their stress. There was a lot of stress, but showing remarkable adaptiveness to the new situation. Everyone shuttered pretty much overnight. There was high levels of stress with nobody. There's still not enough information about what's going on, but Canadians really are adaptive in managing and coming to grips with new scenarios. They're hurting financially, though. There's a lot of Canadians going into debt, a lot of Canadians who have either been laid off or shortened their work hours. And the combination of the social isolation and the economic issue, they're itching to get back to normal. And Canadians feel like they've done their time, and they're pushing to get out. And whether there's going to be a second wave or not, that will force us back indoors. We'll see what that has to do. And some of the other things that we'll be monitoring in the future is the status of mental health, because we know that it's taking a toll, and the degree of optimism that Canadians are feeling about Canada in this moment, it'll be interesting to see the psychological effect if there is a big second wave that sort of takes us back to square one. What is the psychological impact that's going to be on Canadians? And that's still something that we're going to have to keep an eye on and find out if it happens. From a travel perspective, Canadians are willing to travel in their neighborhoods, in their city, in their province even, but will, from a vacation perspective at least, they'll probably stay close to home. And really, not a lot of Canadians right now are interested in modes of transportation beyond their car. And that's again, it's an environment that they can control. And I think as things start to open up, I think the onus will be on these various modes of transportation, and these whether it's from a government perspective or some private organizations. They really need to convey how Canadians are going to feel safe, and they really need to engage with Canadians to find out what it is that's going to make them feel safe. So that's it for my presentation. I think now we were going to do some questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Demetre. That was really an interesting presentation. We have a few questions from our participants. One question was, do you have any survey results on the use of face masks?
We haven't looked at that specifically, but whether or not Canadians are using face masks. Well, we did look at it originally, but I suspect that information is out of date. And I think it's a good point that that we need to take a look at the usage and also the beliefs around it, because there's a lot of different stories and people talking about getting mixed messages about what the mask, what the effectiveness of it is, and even what the purpose of it is. So I think that's a really good point. I think we'll have to go back to measuring that. And just another note, and I have my information here. This is just something that we're distributing. It's not a public release. We're distributing it to organizations that are interested in it and feel that it's of use. And if you feel that this is something that you'd like to keep an eye on, feel free to reach out to me and be put on the distribution list, and I'll be happy to put you on it. It comes out, the report comes out every Wednesday.
Thanks so much, Demetre. Just for everybody, we can ensure that Demetre's information is shared with the people on this call as well after, if they have any questions that they'd like to talk to you about. Next question is, where do people go to get the most trusted information during the pandemic? For example, where do elected officials, healthcare leaders, media, employers, et cetera, get their information from during the pandemic?
So our focus has been on this particular study is among general population, and so we don't have that particular information about what elected officials are doing. But we have done, looked at where Canadians are going to, and also where workers, what the expectation is from an employer point of view. And so what's interesting from just a medium point of view, there's really been a shift to going back to traditional media to find something that is that they really trust, because obviously the things are more urgent right now. TV and newspapers seems to be the place that people are going to the most, and what's falling behind the most is social media. From a specific resource perspective, it's really about going to established organizations, CDC, Johns Hopkins, WHO, and of course the government websites, so Canada.com. So those are really the main places that people are going to. From an employer perspective, it's interesting because there seems to be a real appetite for employers to communicate to their employees. And so roughly, half at the moment are communicating with their employees either daily or every few days, specifically related to COVID. And that actually aligns quite well to what employees are hoping to get. They are hoping to get updates. And so, and the content that they're looking for, specifically there's obviously some things about what's the company doing, what about my stability, how are we adjusting, what are we doing to contribute. So there's a lot of, and there's also the desire to see the employer understands what the employees are going through. But there was a large range of information that employees are actually looking for or hoping to get from their employers, right down to things like what's the latest count, what are the latest announcements from the government, what are the latest aid packages that are coming from the government. So all that is being sought after from an employer perspective.
Thanks, Demetre. Next question. One of your survey results showed an increase in interest in shopping locally, yet we hear a lot about Amazon and e-business booming. How do you reconcile both? Are people telling pollsters one thing but voting with their wallets in another way?
Well, I think what you're referencing is what people want to be doing when things go back to normal, and I think what we're seeing is that you know, this was still, I think that specific data point, things weren't as open. It's a few weeks old. We're much more into phase 2 right now. But I think it's a function of being locked in and having, you know, no real options except to shop online for things because all the stores are being closed. And so I think what people are saying is that, you know, there's a real desire to get back out there and to get back shopping. And there's also, you know, a lot of conversation out there about local community stores and businesses in your neighborhoods that are getting shut down and the need to support them. So I think when you put all that stuff together, I think it indicates a desire, but when things again get back to normal, but we'll have to see whether or not, you know, whether or not people's current desires or the things that they miss or want to support is actually going to transform into action when they're able to get it back out there.
Thanks so much, Demetre. Next question. Which demographic is having the hardest time coping during this pandemic?
I would say that, interestingly, I would say it's, so we tend to look at, from an age perspective, that we go from 18 to 34, roughly 35 to 54 and 55 plus. The 18 to 34 group is less likely to feel that that this pandemic is a real serious scare to them, and in some ways we see evidence of, and I'm sure we've seen it also in the media of younger Canadians sort of flouting the social distancing and feeling the need to get out. And also, they tend to be Canadians that are less established in their career, and while they may have been impacted, you know, they don't necessarily have the financial obligations. And on the opposite side, we have the 55 plus who, you know, they tend to be more people who are retired. Fewer of them are working, and fewer of them are also as mobile. So they seem to be okay as well. So the people that are really having a harder time with this are the people in the in-between phase who are more in the sort of the family upbringing phase, people who have newer mortgages, who are, you know, whose, you know, revenue is particularly important, parents who are currently juggling school or daycare with working from home. You know, there's a lot of pressure there that's happening, and so for that reason, you know, this particular demographic is having a hard time. From a regional perspective, I can't comment without digging into it specifically on a hard time, but specifically on level of focus. Ontario and Quebec seems to be the two provinces, and this is not surprising, that are more focused on the pandemic itself and getting the numbers down, and really on the health scare. You go to the Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're pretty much done with this pandemic, and they're very focused on the economy and opening things up. And they're really pushing back on the idea of social distancing. BC and the Atlantic provinces tend to be somewhere between the two extremes.
Thanks so much, Demetre. We're running low on time, so I'm going to take two more questions, and then we may have to stop. But like I said, we will make your information available to the group here today. Has Angus Reid looked at similar surveys being done in comparable countries on the subject of people's reaction to COVID? If so, are there any noteworthy differences between opinions of Canadians and those in comparable countries?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that our focus right now has been on Canada. That's sort of the bulk where we do our public opinion work, but we in the future we might be exploring a multi-country approach.
Great, thank you. Okay, sorry, we got one more question, and I'll do two more and then we'll call it quits. Is there any data indicating differences in the impacts of COVID-19 based on socioeconomic status / marginalized groups?
Well, The short answer is yes, and it's hard to comment too specifically on marginalized groups because, again, when we're looking at a sample of 1,000 Canadians a week, which is what we do, the sample sizes on those groups tend to be a little bit low, so we try not to draw as firm distinctions. We try to be cautious in our interpretation, but from a socioeconomic point of view, we are really seeing the financial effects are really are what we think most. So these are people that tend to have jobs that are more likely to experience layoffs, and they are also already have significant levels of debt. And it tends to be a lot of credit card debt, and they've accumulated a lot more. So from that perspective, we are seeing some effects. We're actually doing another study with the University of Toronto and St. Michael's Hospital in Canada, where we're actually combining survey data to try to estimate incidence of COVID in Canada. And that's actually being accompanied by home delivered blood tests. It's a pretty ambitious project, really, and because this is one of the biggest questions that we have is trying to figure out what is the true incidence so that we understand, how pervasive it is, because we know that there's a lot of asymptomatic Canadians or Canadians that were sick for a few days and never went to the doctor. So what is it that we're really dealing with? And that is a core question that will inform a lot of answers and policies going forward. But anyways, all this to say that we're sort of in an early examination phase, but we are seeing that specific visible minority groups are having higher levels of incidence relating to COVID. And so again, it's something that we'll have to look closer at, but it's a group that these groups are being affected more than some others.
Thanks so much, Demetre. Last question. Demetre, I appreciate that you acknowledge the perceptual and emotional nature of these survey results. That being said, how reliable do you think these findings are as far as predicting future human behavior? I understand that COVID is unique, but curious if previous public health surveys proved to mirror resulting impacts.
Predicting future behavior and future perception is very difficult, I always, when it comes to information about what do you think is going to happen and what do you think you'll be doing a few months from now, I try to shy away from that. And if you saw, I only had the one slide of what do you think you'll be doing more of and less of. And I think you're exactly right. It's very difficult to measure because the reality is that we are in an emotional moment. We are in a very specific scenario that is not the norm. So the answers that people will give about what are you going to do when things are back to normal, they're not really reliable because the environment is that informs these decisions is so rapidly changing. So yeah, I think that's a very good point about predicting the future. It's very difficult to do, we just have to interpret that sort of data very cautiously.
Well, thank you so much, Demetre. This was a really interesting session. Feel free to stay on for a next session if you like. As you guys can see, Demetre's information is up on that last slide he provided. And I will pass the mic over to Marc Brazeau again, the RAC president.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Demetre. And I think you said it, that opinions and attitudes change on a weekly and a monthly basis. And I think the work that you're doing and have been doing since that second week of March is proven to be very beneficial. So thank you for sharing that information with us. And yes, as Jan alluded to, we have a second speaker. And without further ado, I do want to introduce Christian Day, who is the Chief Economist, Director General, Transportation Economic Analysis at Transport Canada. Christian is responsible for providing advice to the Minister and the senior management team of Transport Canada on the impact of economic and societal trends in Canada and around the world, and also on the resilience and the performance of the Canadian supply chains and the transportation system in general. Christian always brings important insights into trends and data, and I'm sure that we'll have that same opportunity this afternoon to gain some of his knowledge and his expertise. So Christian, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Janet. It's a real pleasure to be here and spend time with all this virtual community. I think we're getting better and better to do that. I think I will have more control now. Am I controlling the presentation, guys, or?
Yep. Christian, if you want to hit your share screen.
Yeah.
And pull up your presentation.
Okay, just let's see. Sorry, always some technical.
No, there's always a lag, you know, when you have to switch. Yeah. And if it's not working for you, Christian, I have it ready for you as well.
Okay, so can you see the presentation right now, or?
We can see it, but I think you just want to go to the slideshow at the top.
Oh, am already at the top?
Sorry, at the very top tab. To your right.
Okay, just a second.
Christian, at the top where it says Home, Insert, Design, Transitions, there's one that says Slideshow.
I cannot see what you're talking about.
Do you want me to try sharing it, Christian?
Yes, please, if you can.
Okay, if you could stop sharing your screen, I will share your presentation.
Excellent.
Okay.
Sorry about that, guys.
No, sometimes it happens, right?
Yeah.
Okay, can you see the full screen now, everybody? Hold on. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, at least I can see it.
Yes, we can.
That's great. Thank you, Janet.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, that's great. So again, thanks for the invitation. So what I would like to do, maybe over the next 15, 20 minutes, is just to give you a bit of an overview of the where we are in terms of the impact of the COVID-19. But I would like to pass a bit that also to take a little bit of time to talk about where we're seeing some sign, and they are very early sign, and they have to be contextualized into an environment that is very volatile. But there are early signs of a beginning of a recovery on the different aspect of the system right now. And I would like to end my presentation by talking a bit more about moving forward and moving forward in this kind of very high uncertain environment. Just want to highlight, where we're seeing the risks, the challenges, and in some regards where we'll need to focus our attention in terms of the monitoring of the efficiency of the transportation system to support Canadian, but also the Canadian economy. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide. I just mentioned that. So the next slide, slide 3. Again, I think it's important to realize that we are a small open economy, And COVID-19 impacted Canada in two ways in that regard. First, domestically, because some sector have been hard hit, and what we have seen in March, April, and in some regard the second half of May, is that about 40% of the economic activities in Canada has been affected. Either that been stopped, or there have been some significant reduction to some of these activities. So when you look at this, the magnitude of the shock to the economy, you can appreciate the domestic impact associated to that. And that's the first channel that by which the COVID-19 impact the economy, impact Canadian, and you'll see that impact also the transportation sector. The second channel, and because we're a small open economy, is through trade. And the fact that all our trading partners have been also affected, and very significantly affected again, it had an implication for us in terms of our export, but our import as well. So the trade was also facing a very significant shock, and again it translates into some reduced level of activities on the transportation demand for the passenger and the merchandise and the freight dimension. So I won't go into detail, but this slide gives you some sense in terms of the magnitude of the shock that we have been facing in terms of the different key economic indicators. And again, it's very, very significant. And the economic indicators tend to lag a little bit with time. So like the GDP, the monthly GDP that we have right now, it's only March. We know that March was the beginning of the crisis, so the numbers in April are expected to be even more significantly affected by that, and in some of the May as well. We have better information on the labor market side, on the retail side at the macro level, and we know that the shock has been very, very significant. The labor market condition deteriorate very significantly. We reach high historical record of unemployment rate, have been more than few million, in fact up to 4 or 5 million Canadian losing job or losing an appetite to look at job on the labor market, and you can appreciate what it means in terms of income loss, and also probably a changing attitude in regards of the economic activity. So but the slide also highlight what is happening with our key trading partners, and again they have all been very, very, very significant effect. And it's a bit funny when you look at the numbers and when you look at what happened. The crisis started in the Asia, and we have started to feel basically on the trade side the crisis from Asia, so China, India, others in country first, and after that with the spread of the coronavirus to Europe, we have started to see the same trend in the reduction of activities with Europe, and more recently, it's more in the context of North America and South America, where we're seeing some challenges. And it's something that we're monitoring very carefully. The U.S. remain our key trading partner, with China as another key one. And what we're seeing right now is a bit more upside risk in these two economies, at least in the short term. And that may again add a bit more volatility in terms of the demand and our ability to trade with these two countries in the next 2 weeks. So next slide. So one interesting result, though, when we look at the impact of the COVID-19 is that it didn't affect the transportation sector in the same way. And we were relatively positively surprised by the resiliency on the freight transportation system in some aspects. Because what we have seen since the beginning of the crisis is a reduction of the activity there on the transportation demand by about 10% globally. And of course, it varies considerably depending on the sector and the region. but the supply chain was quite efficient in adapting to the change in the demand, and the transportation sector has been quite effective in doing so. Whatever it's the port, the railway system, and also the trucking system, the way the system adapt to that was very good in some regards for the magnitude and the importance of the shock. So what we have seen so far is a reduction of activity, and I've provided some numbers on the rail volume traffic since the beginning of the year. So we're talking about a reduction of 10% overall, with a bit more a reduction on the container side, and it's a blend of domestic weakness of the domestic demand, so the import on the container side, but also some challenges in accessing the export market in some regards. And on the bulk side, the reduction has been less significant because there's clearly a kind of distinction between different kind of goods there. And what we have seen is that the essential good, grain, fertilizer, potash, coal in some regards as well, have been continuing to grow or have been less affected by the reduction in external domestic demand. And what we have seen, the three sector that has been the most affected is clearly the manufacturing sector, because basically we closed the manufacturing sector in Canada for about 12 weeks. And the other sector is the energy one, and what we call non-essential, which is more or less the domestic good that are non-essential for our living. So that was the main three area where we have seen, very significant reduction of activity. And of course, we have seen this translate into a very significant reduction on transportation demand in these three sectors. So next slide. So in terms of on the merchandise and the freight dimension as well, what we've been looking at is other way to look at the impact outside the rail and the port system is also the trucking and the road system. And we have now pretty good data on that allow us to monitor the situation in terms of car and truck movement, at least at the border, and also in key trade and urban corridor in Canada. So which allow us now to monitor on a daily basis the situation there. And what we have seen is that, the trucking activities have been declining at the border by about 30%, and but we'll see the news are getting a bit better on that front. And that is basically reflecting the reduction of exchange with our U.S. partner since the beginning of the crisis. And on the road side, clearly, the car and the truck in the key urban corridor, when you look at the March, April, it was almost anemic. But more recently, what we're starting to see is a more significant and quite significant increase in the key trade and urban corridor right now, which is again suggesting a kind of a recovery of the economic activity from a first mile, last mile perspective. So the next slide. So when you look at the big picture on the impact of the transportation demand, what we have seen is that yes, the freight has been affected by 8 to 10%, and depending on the region, the commodity may be more or less. But where we have felt a bit more the impact of the COVID-19 is on the passenger side, and for Almo, imply on the passenger movement, we have seen very significant reduction of the traffic activity and the demand there, and it's probably an area that will be suffering the most and for a longer period of time about the shock on the COVID-19. And this slide highlights some of the numbers in terms of reduction of traffic in aviation, public transit, bus ferries, and people moving in Canada or traveling, entering to Canada. And what you're seeing right now is it's all in very significant reduction. Air has been very, very, very hard hit by the situation. And giving again that we're a small open economy, we suffer probably even more than other countries, especially when you compare the situation in Canada with other IATA numbers in the other, in the rest of the world. Canada has been really hard. We're talking about 95 to 98% reduction of traffic there, and a very significant change in terms of the behavior there. So that will need to be monitored. Public transit is a bit the same kind of things. We're looking at, whatever it's rail, public transit, or anything that relates to the movement of the people. We have seen a significant reduction in ridership there. Intercity bus and rail basically collapse, depending of the region, between 50 to 100%. Ferries as well. And again, the trans traveler entering Canada has been also very, very significantly affected by that. So that's an area on the passenger side that we have seen a lot more significant impact than on the merchandise side. And we think that these impact will probably last longer, and will probably require a different reaction or a different realignment of the structure of the transportation system to meet what might be the new normality in this area. So the next slide. So some relatively positive news on the recovery side, because we're quite fortunate. We're working with weekly data from different sources, from the industry, but from also my colleague at CBSA, NAFCAN, CATSA, and other sources like that. So we are in a situation that that we're able to monitor on a weekly basis. The recovery or the performance of some of the sector of the transportation system, and what we have seen is early sign of a recovery, and the early sign are first, in the three sectors that have been the most affected on the freight side. So manufacturing sector is reopening, and what we have seen is that the activity on the production side has been moving up. And the demand for transportation system, whatever it's rail, truck related, has started to increase. Again, it's early days, but we're seeing some positive movement since the reopening of this sector in the economy. Energy remaining anemic right now, so we're not expecting any significant recovery there before the global economic condition are getting in a more foundational and more solid, foundation in terms of recovery. And the other sector that has been the most affected, which is what we call the non-essential goods sector, which is more or less, on the domestic side, everything that is not related to food or agri-food sector or health-related, products. We're seeing a beginning of a recovery there. And in fact, in some sector, we're seeing a bit of a boom, a very strong recovery on the demand side, which has started to translate into a recovery on the import side. So the next slide on the recovery highlight a bit the situation on the passenger side. And what you can see is, again, very, very early signal of a beginning of a recovery. It's not in the same magnitude than in the freight and supply chain sector. We're talking about a very modest, trend moving up in terms of the passenger demand, and it remains, in the 95% below, the benchmark of 2019. Even though we're seeing some improvement it's really, really small. And it comes back to admit some of the point that was raised in Demetre's presentation in terms of, the behavior of the people and the fear that we're seeing from Canadians to use public system. And they will probably rely a lot more on their own private car first in order to get some form of insurance that, the public dimension on the passenger side will be safe for them, secure for them, and there will be also, a change in the attitude of the people about, connecting with the others and accessing new markets. So we believe that the recovery on this sector will be very low, very gradual. And I don't have the slide here, but we've been doing some scenario building on that regards, because I think forecasting in this kind of environment might be a bit more too risky. But depending on the scenario you're looking for, we don't think that there will be a strong recovery in the passenger transportation demand before the vaccine is fully implemented, and before we are seeing, an openness of the different market to be there. And we believe that it may take up to 4 and 5 years before we're reaching either, similar normality than we have reached in 2019, or a new normality that might be lower than what we were seeing in terms of transportation demand in 2019. And there are different reasons for that. One of the reasons is that there will be change of behavior of the people, like, working from home will be probably something that will last. That's going to be a structural change in the way to work. And also then the structural change in the needs to use the transportation system to go work. But we're seeing a bit the same thing on the way to use the system to travel. We're not expecting, again, a very, very significant change before, at best the end of 2021. And after that, a slow, gradual return to probably some new normality, which will probably be lower than what we have seen in 2019. Okay, the next slide. So the next slide, I don't want to go through in the detail because it's, so within the department, just to inform people, I've been creating in my unit a new unit that is now focusing on what we call, the outlook and the predictive analytics associated to that. And the reason for that, it's not necessarily to predict in the best accuracy, what might be, the situation of the driver for the transportation demand capacity and come with specific numbers, but it's really to inform a bit more dialogue between, the demand and the supply side of the system. So this group will be bringing a bit more information and data on where we're seeing the demand on the freight side, where we're seeing the demand on the passenger side to be, and some of the risks associated with, this scenario. And we'll be also providing with some information about what it means then in terms of, the way we're going to, the capacity that is there and the capacity that will be required to meet, these demands. And we'll be providing this scenario now on an annual basis. We're planning to put our first one in the public domain as soon as by the end of this calendar year. We are now in a big, validation engagement with, the industry, whatever they are, the shippers or, the transportation industry supplying services, in order to develop this scenario. So we have started that before COVID-19. So COVID-19 is adding a bit more complexity in the development of this perspective, giving the high level of uncertainty that is there. But the way to cast a bit, these risks right now, we have identified 3 main factors that will be quite important for us to get views and scenario built around in order to have a better appreciation in terms of where we can see the risk in the future. And the first one is clearly the public health element. And on the public health, it's not only in Canada, but also internationally. Any change in the directive or the regulation associated to that will have an impact on the demand side, and will have an impact in terms of the accessibility or the capacity of the system to respond to this demand. And that's one big driver that we're not focusing at all, to be honest, in the past, that now we are developing, understanding about. And I mentioned that for now, some of the basic assumption we're looking for is that we're not seeing, we're still seeing a lot of uncertainty on the public health side until the end of 2021. So which means that they will be up and down. And there's a high likelihood that we will see not only a second wave, but maybe some markets are open, may close again, or may reopen again. And we will probably be in this kind of environment for at least the next, 16 to 18 months. And again, the vaccine will be quite instrumental to move on the public health side to, probably a more certain environment. So public health will be now one of the key drivers in on the transportation demand domestically and internationally in the short to medium term. The other element that we're looking for is the global and the domestic economic condition. And on that regards, it's probably, outside, if you're trying to control for the public health element, there's probably more certainty about where we're seeing the growth to be. But there's still, again, a bit of a uncertainty or volatility in terms of perspective. I was looking at the IMF revision this week that they announced yesterday, and other international organizations. The trends in terms of the perspective on the impact of the COVID-19 for this year and the recovery in the subsequent year is not improving. In fact, what you're seeing is that most of the forecasters have been revising down their economic scenario for this economic year, and also for the next one. And nobody right now is expecting a full recovery, which means that we'll be, coming back to where we were prior to the COVID-19, before now, at best, in 2022. Again, so we are in a recovery scenario on the economic side that will take time. And before we're reaching the point to where we were before, at best, it will take another 2 years to reach that. And that's, again, something that will be affecting, the demand side on the threat and the dimension. And the last but not the least is that there will be a specificity to the transportation sector. Some areas or some sectors or some, subset of the sector might be more vulnerable to the public and economic environment right now. And this vulnerability may force realign some structural adjustment of the sector, and which may lead to a different transportation sector in a few years now than what we have right now. And this new sector will perform maybe differently, the service and the way to deliver things for Canadian and Canadian enterprise than what we have right now. That's something that we're monitoring the situation very carefully as well. And that's a combination of these three sectors that, will highlight a bit some of the risks that we're seeing on our side. So the next slide, and I think after that I will stop to get some questions. So I mentioned, we're getting a bit more in the detail here in terms of, some of the short-term, implication or risk there that I mentioned. I think what we are more fundamentally looking at is clearly, two different paths in terms of the recovery. The passenger side, we are in an environment that it will take time. and it will take also and no significant, a recovery before again before the public health situation has been on better footing, I would say, whatever it's through vaccine or new drugs that will be available, and ensuring that there's this is used widely across the world. So that's on the passenger side will be very, very key. On the passenger side, we are also exploring the idea of having probably a structural change in the way the passenger are using the transportation system, and which will also put probably lower demand, not only in the next few years, but over time on the public side of the system. But again, we're talking about changing behavior, and it's something that we'll need to monitor, look at, and assess through the course of the next few weeks and months and years in order to see what might be the structural implication for the sector. On the merchandise and the freight side, I think we're still seeing a resiliency of the sector. We're not seeing any big change per se on that regards. We believe that the sector is quite resilient. We have seen that with the port, with the rail and the trucking industry being able to adapt. Yes, there are irritants, and probably areas where the demand is not aligning to the capacity, perfectly when it's needed. But overall, what we have seen is that all the modes seems to be adjusting relatively well in the fluctuation of the demand. The point that will be very key to monitor on the demand side for the on the supply chain and also in the freight merchandise is the certainty on the recovery of some of the demand. The worst thing that can happen is that we have some stop and go kind of a signal from the demand side, and because the system will have difficulty to adjust in terms of the capacity to a very an environment that might be highly volatile on the demand side, and that's probably an area that we'll need to focus our dialogue between the user of the system and the people that provide the services to the system over the next few weeks and months to see how can we get work together in order to make sure that we develop a common understanding of where we're seeing the risk on the volatility of the demand and the access to the capacity on the transportation side. So that's in a nutshell what I was looking to talk to you about today. So I think I'll stop there, Mark and Janet, and want to ensure that we have a bit of time for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Christian. That was really informative. The first question for you is, you mentioned that the IMF is now saying 2022 before a full recovery. Do you believe that Canada's economy is even more exposed to a longer recovery because of the fact that we really depend on exports to drive our economy?
It's a tricky question to answer. As an economist, what I'm going to say is that, in the past, from what I've seen from the private sector forecasting, everybody were assuming that it will take us about 2 weeks to come back to the previous economic level that we reached. I think, it's still a bit the consensus right now there. But the only downside risk to this scenario is what will happen with the U.S. right now. And of course, people are getting more and more concerned that we may be facing some openness or in fact that some of the market might be closed, especially on the south part of the U.S. with the potential of a emerging new wave there of the spread. But if we're moving into this kind of environment that some of our trading partners are facing more challenges than what we're expecting, then Canada might take a lot more time to reach this new or come back to where we were in in March, for example, in terms of production level. So I think I'm still relatively optimistic that, within the next 2 years, if everything is moving well for our trading partners, that we will come back to where we were 2 years ago. But the main risk that I'm seeing is that if the situation is not going well for some of our key trading partners, then we'll be suffering for sure.
Thank you, Christian. Next question. Any views on manufacturing sector recovery? How much depends on domestic recovery and how much on international global recovery?
It's a very good question. When you're talking about manufacturing sector, you cannot talk about the manufacturing sector in Canada. We are fully integrated with the US on the manufacturing sector. You just need to think about some of the key ones like the auto one, some of the equipment side as well. So you cannot think about the Canadian situation. It's really the overall sector. So what it will be happening, in terms of on the manufacturing sector, will partly be affected by the domestic demand. But the main drivers for us will be to ensure that the demand in North America remain there for our products. And, when you look at the auto sector, the aerospace, the material of equipment, the main client remain North America for these three markets in terms of, because there's a lot of integration among this sector there. So again, I think I'm relatively prudent and optimistic in terms of the recovery of this sector, but it will again depend of the ability of the three amigos in terms of dealing with the public health issues and ensuring that the full integration of on the production side of these markets is really there. And so that's the supply side. So it's not just a demand aspect on the manufacturing side. The supply will be important as well. Because I'm confident that, these sectors remain quite competitive to access the market on the demand side. So I would say right now it's, I'm more concerned about the supply integration of this sector among the three, the US, Canada, and Mexican economy, just to ensure that we're managing well, the public health issue, to ensure that the production and the full integration of the production among the three economy is as efficient as it can be on this sector. Because if the US, for example, close their manufacturing sector on the auto side, we'll have to close ours as well, because a lot of the equipment are done here in Canada, and they are moving the US to be deal with the plant there and move back to the Canada. So there's a lot of integration on these sectors. So we rely in a good way, it improves the efficiency, but we rely a lot on the interconnection of the economy for that.
Thanks, Christian. We have two more questions, and then I think that's it for time. So as a follow-up question, are there any worries about nearshoring and decrease in trade?
I don't like to be to perceive to be negative, but the trade is something that when you look at the forum on the economic discussion, I think it's probably one of the elements that is discussed right now. And one of the questions is that do we believe that the COVID-19 will lead us to a new trade environment? Where we'll be shifting a bit more the production at the local level, at least for the essential goods in each of the economy, and will be that leading then to a bit of a downward pressure about the overall trade globally. I think from an economic perspective, I think we can appreciate the fact of relying a bit more on domestic production for a sector that we consider essential for the living of the population. And as economists, I think there's a good rationale to do that. But at the same time, we should never forget that a lot of the growth and the increase of our standard of living over the past 3 decades came from the openness of the market, which lead to specialization of the production, giving the comparative advantage of each of the economy, which allow us to have products that are not only produced more effectively, but at lower cost and a better use of the resources globally. So my fear is that we may be overshooting in the next few weeks, a few years, and maybe an environment where there might be some pressure to rebalance the local and the global trade dimension. But my hope is that the economic fundamental will come back, because this is very important for global growth overall, and also for the emerging economies that are having benefited, like the developed economy, about growth over the past 2 decades. That's where the growth will happen in the next 2 decades. And if they cannot access in the same way to the market than the developed countries over the past 2 decades, that will affect their ability to grow, and it will affect our ability to reach this market and access to new markets. So in a nutshell, I'm saying there will probably be a very good reason to have good conversation about the rebalancing between the local versus the global trade. But the economic fundamental is still there to make sure that we remain into this global trade environment in the future, to ensure that we can provide in a very efficient way all the goods and the services that not only Canadians are looking for, but also all the other economies are looking for. But there will probably be tension in the short term for less growth on the trade side. That's my perspective right now.
Thanks so much, Christian. We're going over time here, but people are still sending in questions. So I'll just ask one last one, and then I think we'll call it a day. It's always great to have these questions. It's always a good sign. From an organizational perspective, via rail, for example, are there measures that can effectively stimulate demand, or will demand recover as a result of a much wider set of factors that are outside the control of organizations?
It's a very good question. On the passenger side, I think we're probably moving into a new environment where the old way or the old practices won't be sufficient to stimulate the demand and come back to the same level of demand than we had before. I mentioned that and in some regards, it's not only the institution that will give, like VIA, for example, on the rail side. I think it's a lot broader than that. I think that we're talking about a potential shift in the behavior of the people in the short term, at least, to use public transportation system, and at the same time, probably a transformation of the way that people want to use the system. I think we are still in the early days of that, so it's tough for me to say something definitive on that, if it's going to be a major behavioral change on the passenger side or an adjustment. But everything is pointing into the direction that there will be a new normal. We can dispute what is this new normal, but I think people are less and less disputing that we are probably moving into a new normal state for the transportation demand on the passenger side. And by doing so, it means that the sector will need to adapt to that. So we'll need to adapt in terms of capacity, in terms of probably the way to reach and provide services to Canadian on that regards. And that's the process we're going through right now, is to get a better appreciation of the potential structural change that we'll be seeing, and what it means for the industry about the adaptation of the capacity, or in terms of the practices for providing services on the transportation passenger domain.
Okay, great stuff, Christian. This is Mark here again, and I think your last comment is reminds me of some of the challenges we faced in the past in the transportation industry, whether it be 9/11, whether it be SARS. There's been challenges in the past, and the supply chain and the passenger transportation system has adapted and has recovered. And obviously, this is it's a different situation. It's on a global scale. But I think your insights into the number of questions we had was very, very beneficial. So I want to thank you on behalf of the Railway Association of Canada, Christian, for joining us this afternoon for your insights. And I want to thank everybody who participated as well. We hope that you've enjoyed this first edition of our Lunch and Learn for 2020, and there will be more that we will offer up in the weeks and months ahead. And we'll make sure that you continue to receive those invitations. So thank you, everyone. And again, thank you to both of our speakers, Demetre and to Christian. Much appreciated. Thank you.
All. Take care.